Alright, we're here on the Vanderbilt site looking at some of the modules here in secondary reading instruction, teaching vocabulary and comprehension in the content areas. The module starts with challenge, thoughts, perspective and resources assessment, and a wrap up. So let's go ahead and begin by looking at the introduction. We're given some examples here. This was put in as a video. The idea here is to try to go through the importance of the vocabulary in different subject areas. We're looking at a chemistry teacher here, and some of this gets a bit pedantic at times. We talk about Miss Jesser here, how she's chagrined, vocabulary meaning troubled, and it's talking about the level and the jargon, trying to give you an idea of what it's like to be around words you're not familiar with. Even though the words that they're choosing here seem a bit artificial. The problem is they come up in a faculty meeting later, which appears a bit forced because there's not a lot of times that this chemistry teacher and then this English teacher and our government and civics teacher come together and they're talking about the issues they're having in the classroom because their students aren't understanding the academic vocabulary they're using to explain the concepts. And while they vent this as a source of frustration, they agree that it's not really their position to go through the academic instruction of reading literacy and vocabulary, which kind of introduces the whole problem that there's not really a place where that happens individually when the best place for it to happen is organically throughout all the courses. This is part of the whole issue about content area, literacy, and vocabulary, because the best person to teach chemistry vocabulary would be the chemistry teacher, and the best person to teach government vocabulary would be the government teacher. But sometimes we're lacking the resources to do that effectively. So it's important that we realize that reading in content areas is different than reading for enjoyment. So different skills have to be used and taught to accomplish those different tasks. We have to be able to hold the conceptual knowledge and apply it in that area and use it for problem solving. The statistic here says that only 1 in 4 high school students taking college entrance exams met college readiness benchmarks in all subject areas, with only half demonstrating reading proficiency at the college level. And this is an issue because if the idea of literacy is the ability to navigate ideas, then without literacy in the content areas, then we can't navigate the ideas of our content effectively. Now we have a very respectful amount of information here talking about what vocabulary instruction looks like. This seems to be a common model here. We have to start with selecting essential words, then defining and contextualizing that. That includes relating to prior experience and connecting it to their lives. Then actively processing involves using graphic organizers, and it involves rewriting, and involves discussion, which ties in with the multiple exposures. Multiple exposures not just in one place, but also over time. Now, whenever we're selecting words, sometimes I think that there's some confusion here. We started off talking really about secondary. There are times when pulling in some of the elementary stuff is valuable, but I don't know if it's always applicable. It depends on the level of your class. The pulling in these different words, they talk about 3 different tiers. Tier 1 words would be things that are very, very commonplace. Words like table. Tier 2 words are words that are used across multiple content areas. They're not content specific, but they're not found as quite as high frequency. A word like analyze. Whereas Tier 3 words would be highly specific. One of the issues with Tier 2 words is because they're not specific to one content area, they're distributed. No one tends to take individual responsibility for teaching them, so some of their instruction gets overlooked. A Tier 3 word is a highly specific word. A word like parabola, for example. Defining and contextualizing is important. It's noted to try to avoid things like going over, looking up definitions at the back of the book, or or in the dictionary. It's more about putting it in context of the situation and about making sure that the word is well understood in its area. Relating it to previous experiences is really important here, and also making sure that we understand how it's going to relate with the lesson that we're learning. Actively processing refers to learners in an instruction instead of just lecture. There has to be some kind of interaction with the vocabulary itself, and it has to be over multiple exposures so that you're not doing it just one way, so you're tying in some multiple learning styles, but you're also doing it multiple times so that you have increased retention. The one thing I really want to look at here is all of this talk about the theory on how instruction should happen is all well and good from a pedagogic level, but looking at actual engagement, these things tend to be very boring and they don't overcome the inherent vocabulary of motivation. The Freyer model here is one example of a graphic organizer that will work sometimes. Having your term in the middle, definition, characteristics, examples, and non-examples. We'll have a completed one here as well. So that whenever we look at it, we can see how something like this would help not only through brainstorming, but laying it out would increase some of the retention level just by the act of creation. And I think it's obvious that vocabulary typically happens at the beginning of a lesson. So in order to have this effective comprehensive instruction, first have to activate prior knowledge, relate it, other definitions of the word, other scenarios where it comes up to, and kind of give a context for where we're starting with. Now, all of the literacy stuff is all kind of tied together. So vocabulary is tied up with reading, is tied up with writing. So when you're monitoring comprehension, writing and sentence creation and speaking are all the best ways to see if vocabulary words have really been uptaken. Because if they can be communicated and if they can be used in context, then it becomes clear very quickly whether or not the word is truly understood. Graphic organizers are probably one of the best ways whenever you're there in the middle. You've gotten past the basic definition, but you're not quite to mastery. This is an example of chronology, maybe a story or a history. Or here's an example of using one in chemistry, just a simple table. If you design your questions in such a way, you can ask them very targeted so that the student is forced to answer the question most effectively only using that vocabulary word. This also really helps if you're using multiple vocabulary words within the same lesson that are connected to each other, so the student has to choose which vocabulary word to use. Once you've trained your students good question answering, it'll take some time to get them trained to good question asking using the vocabulary words. And you want to start with very simple questions. Level 1 is what they call them. This is sort of analogous to Bloom's taxonomy. Going to low-level information to level 2 to level 3. Your goal is to get level 3 question making, but don't expect it at the beginning. One of the issues that we have with teaching this content is that the definition of literacy sometimes gets tied up. The reading can be more than just words. For example, in mathematics, looking through equations and following the numbers and understanding what those things mean and the ideas they represent is really important. And you have to have the vocabulary to be able to read those symbols and be able to describe the ideas that are going forth. So we have to make sure that we've picked out the words that are necessary to accomplish that goal, and then make sure that we lay a basis of definition and put them in context, so what we're actually doing in class and the problems we're solving, and using them in a meaningful way to emphasize these ideas. Once you develop value, then we actually have to process it. We need activities that get the students using the words specifically. These can't be individual, they need to be spread out. Ideally, once you've gotten through basic vocabulary instruction, these things can be integrated directly into your lessons rather than be separate lessons on their own. In order for there to be effective comprehensive instruction, After we have all these different practices and different ways integrated into our lessons throughout the day organically, we need to make sure that we also have assessment. Our assessment has to be meaningful so that it really monitors the level of comprehension that our students have. Can they ask questions and answer questions? Can they use vocabulary in context? Can they select the vocabulary that's most appropriate for this scenario? Now, we did look at some graphic organizers and we saw some things. A lot of what we've seen here has been pedagogy on the how, the why. There wasn't a lot of information on real activities that seemed more engaging for less motivated learning. This resource right here came well recommended, um, and it's probably something I'll look into for some further research. That way we can look at some activities that'll be more meaningful and more useful actually in the classroom. Because if our goal is to get our students thinking about our concepts, and if we think with words to improve thinking, we have to teach vocabulary. That way we can think about our context areas and do it in the most effective means possible, be able to relay those ideas. That's